And we're live for the MMA Prospectus, joined once again, as always, not for the last time,
Maybe.
by Tom Grant. And we are here to talk mostly about UFC 198, to be frank. We got some other prospects to talk about too, around the world, especially this BAMMA card. It looks pretty stacked. Maybe look a little bit at last week, but this UFC 198 card has a lot of talent worth discussing on it, and that's going to be the heart of today's focus, correct?
A lot of quality MMA going on this weekend. This is we had a couple like slow weekends in a row. This one, not a slow weekend in any sense.
Yeah, it's a little weird. I guess Bellator is not going quite head to head with the UFC, but
they're kind of going head to head.
Yeah, I think they're going to be done by the time the pay-per-view card starts, is the thing.
Yeah, still, you're taking on like the undercard of a pretty darn good UFC card.
I would rather watch Damian Maia versus Matt Brown than King Mo versus
anybody.
Phil Davis. Like King Mo versus Phil Davis it's a good fight, but if you ask me, here's Damian Maia versus Matt Brown, here's King Mo versus Phil Davis, I'm going to watch Damian Maia versus Matt Brown every single time.
Can you name a fight on the Bellator card that you would be more excited to see than John Lineker versus Rob Font?
No.
It's yeah. It's a curious choice that they decided not to go on Friday, but
yeah, who knows?
Whatever.
Maybe Friday had a cops marathon on it. I don't know.
Yeah.
You never know with Spike. So this UFC 198 card, even without Uriah Hall versus Anderson Silva, is just a hell of a good card. And while we could talk about any of a number of major prospects on it, the first fight I want to talk about is honestly the first fight on the card: Renato Moicano versus Zubaira Tukhugov.
I'm right there with you. I think this is a pretty interesting fight. Carneiro was supposed to fight Mirsad Bektic last year, actually like a year ago, and got hurt. But he's a really interesting young fighter, and he's an interesting mashup of skills because when it comes to his hands, he is almost like a pure counter puncher when he's punching. But when he wants to press forward, he puts together like near Taekwondo-ish kick combinations where he'll like butterfly from foot to foot and stuff. And so pretty interesting offensive tools. And then like on the ground, he's a back taker, finishes rear naked chokes, and looked pretty good the last time he fought. But like the last time he fought was 2014.
Yeah, he came in and he blitzed Tom Ninamaki out, which is good. Ninamaki is I would almost call him like the prototypical quadruple A fighter, the guy who is just good enough that he's going to be really dominant on the regionals and just not quite good enough to survive in the UFC long term.
Yeah.
So beating Ninamaki is still a very good win, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he looks like coming back. I have good expectations just because before he left, the word on him was that he's the kind of fighter that is just always in the gym, always training, always working. So that suggests to me, that may be partially too why his rehab took so long. Maybe he just kept pushing himself back into training, but it does suggest to me that he probably won't be soft or unready when he comes back. But he has a hell of a fight to come back to for his first fight back after more than a year off to face Zubaira Tukhugov. That's just that's a tall order.
That's rough. Tukhugov is like on the feet. He's weird. Like he's a weird, awkward fighter. I don't know his off the top of my head. I don't recall his martial arts background, but just watching him fight, he strongly suggests combat sambo to me, the way he strikes. And it's a bit awkward. It's very powerful. And he's got a really nice feel for like striking in transition, like as he breaks the clinch or as guys get up from takedowns. And he's got good takedowns, and he really liked catching kicks to hit takedowns. So it's a tough fight, and I think it's going to be really fun because both guys, like Tukhugov, is like peaking. He's going to start entering that prime. This is like probably the beginning of his prime. Kind of the same deal for Renato. So like I'm looking forward to this fight. We're seeing two young fighters that should be hitting their stride in the next couple months or like this year.
Yeah, Tukhugov's background, he's a master of sport in hand-to-hand combat and a master of sport in combat sambo. So
yeah, okay,
very much prototypical. Chechen, came up through that Tiger Muay Thai and K Dojo kind of connections.
mm-hmm.
I believe he trained a lot alongside who's the lightweight Mirbek Taisimov, I want to say.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, his striking's definitely a little bit funky. He had a weird fight with Felipe Nover last time out, in which like it was really, really clear that he was just way, way more powerful than Nover.
Mm-hmm.
But he spent most of the fight just kind of sitting and waiting for opportunities, and he won a split decision, but it ended up being a very close fight just because he could never quite push the pace above a simmer or really exert any lasting dominance. It's sort of like if Tukhugov doesn't catch you with something really hard that hurts you, obviously that he can then jump on, he's gonna make the fight's gonna end up being this weird, awkwardly paced, inconsistent thing.
Yeah.
And that's much. I think that's a bit less the case with Moicano, but it could be a weird kind of style versus style clash where Moicano is such a devoted counterpuncher when he's boxing, and Tukhugov is so like one strike at a time or just quick combo, then take a minute off, quick combo, take a minute off, that it could end up being a really weirdly paced fight.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's Tukhugov's just got a weird kind of style. Like on the feet, his rhythm is weird. His pace in the fight's a little weird. The way he moves just seems a little off, but it's effective. So yeah, but I agree. He's gonna have those fights where just nothing seems to click.
The interesting thing to me too here will be that like because as you said, both these guys have been fighting for. I mean, Tukhugov much more actively, but they've both been fighting since about 2010. Is which of these guys is really going to make a big leap, or which of them is going to get caught kind of muddling around? Like I actually kind of expect a lot more growth out of Moicano over the next couple of years. I have the feeling that even though Tukhugov's only 25, he might just end up being more of like kind of a good tough action fighter, but somebody who never quite reaches an elite status. I don't know. Like
I wouldn't have a problem with that assessment, especially of Tukhugov. I'd want to see how Moicano looks in this fight, but he looked like a guy that had a pretty functional, streamlined MMA game coming forward.
Yeah.
He seemed to have a good sense of like when to wait back and work his punches, like counter punches. Man, he's got a hair trigger on those counter punches. And when to push forward with kicks, and then as soon as it hits the ground, he's trying to take it back. So I'm looking forward to seeing him back in there, seeing what he has after that long layoff.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting fight. It's a good match. I mean, it's just the kind of fight that makes me. It kind of reaffirms my position that 145 is the best, like top to bottom division in the UFC. It may not be, it's obviously not as big as lightweight or welterweight. It may not have necessarily some of the same stars at the top. Although obviously these days, if Conor McGregor ever fights there again, having McGregor, Aldo, and Mendez at the top is a pretty good trio. But it just, at all the way down to the bottom of the division they're just all these talented fighters that are on the rise and that I'm really excited to see every time they fight. We've got Duho Choi coming up again here soon, and obviously we talked about Mirsad Bektic, and it just, there are so many young, talented fighters in that division that I can't wait to see more of, and Moicano and Tukhugov are definitely, it's a great start to this card.
Yeah.
So the other fighter that we obviously cannot miss talking about, there are others that we'll talk about as well, but the next choice of top talent on this card or young talent on this card is Warlley Alves.
Yep. Total. I was listening to you say that, and I'm like, if he doesn't say Alves, we're gonna have problems.
No, it's got to be Alves.
Yeah, Alves is a plus athlete, really good fighter, really good in the clinch, and then just an absolutely lethal guillotine game.
Mm-hmm.
I think going back to 2013, he has, of his 6 wins in the last 3 years, 4 of them have been by guillotine. He and when he was a strong study of, I studied him quite closely in the guillotine piece that I did looking back at 2015, because he had 2 of the guillotines that were finished in that year, and he is just so good in the clinch, guiding his opponent's head to where he wants it to be, and then just snapping on to guillotines with it. And he's really good at using the threat of that guillotine to set up other offense, mostly like knees and elbows and things like that in the clinch. He's really at home against the cage, really likes fighting in close. And I think against a guy like Brian Barberena, that I think it's a matchup that could lead to Alves looking every bit the hot shit prospect that he is.
Yeah, I feel a bit bad for Barberena because, all he did was go out and beat Sage Northcutt, and then he gets a fight like this. This is one of those fights where, one of those times where it's like sometimes getting that huge upset win is just not the nicest thing for your career. He gets to open a huge pay-per-view, which is awesome, but he's definitely doing it as a sacrificial lamb to make Warlley Alves look really great at home in Brazil.
Hey, Barberena, we heard you like head and arm chokes.
Yeah, and
go get in there with Alves. Yeah, I mean, Barberena could pull off the miracle again. It's MMA, but I'm thinking it's more likely that Alves puts together something on him, because just like he is a legitimately exciting prospect that I kind of feel is kind of flying under some people's radars. He's like hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, we've entered this weird stage, I think, with the UFC, which is kind of why we have this show and why it's so heavily focused on the UFC first and foremost, is that it just seems like there's such a willingness to dismiss actual prospects, and then the focus gets really outsized in weird ways for guys that probably don't have much of a shot of making it, or just everybody seems to kind of pick their favorite guy that they think is a huge prospect, and then everybody else is trash.
Yeah.
Maybe it's in that way. Maybe it's becoming a little bit more like boxing, where people aren't so much interested in who the next big thing is. It's that they've already attached their ego to some fighter, and now they're waiting. And everybody else is just like, oh, that guy's never going to contend, and he's no good, so who cares about him?
Beaten and all that. And yeah, it's really more about who gets you excited. And also let's be straight. Part of Wally Alves' problem is they came off tough Brazil.
Yep.
It took him the Alan Joban fight. Everyone was like, oh, they're throwing Joban like a dude from tough Brazil. This is going to be a massacre. And then he wins a decision, and people are like, all right. And then he's run off 2 guillotine wins against respectable competition, and now people are starting to pay attention. But when you really go back and watch those fights, you realize that Alves is just skill and athlete wise on a level that is going to make him a fighter worth following at the very least.
Yeah, it's tough. Definitely there's this ongoing feeling that, and I understand where it came from. It's mostly it's come from the fact that the UFC is so much bigger than it used to be, that it's way harder for a fighter to go from a show like Tough to being a top-ranked fighter. Like, if you are exiting off of Tough into the bottom of the welterweight division, you are now, like, functionally 3 or 4 years from a potential top-level fight.
You're looked as meat. Like, most fans look at you as just meat for the rest of the division.
And it used to be, obviously, that if you came off Tough, we would expect, like, oh, you came off Tough, you're going to win 2 or 3 or 4 fights, and then you're going to be a top-level fighter. That's what we expect. That's what we want to see off of Tough. And so a lot of the debate or a lot of the rhetoric around it has been that the talent they get for Tough has gotten noticeably worse.
Mm-hmm.
And it hasn't. Like, I've gone back and you look at those old seasons, you look at the fighters that were on there, you look even at the fighters that, went on to do great things, and it's really hard to make a case for the idea that the Ultimate Fighter has attracted notably worse talent over the years. Like, there have been some shit awful seasons, but there have always been some shit awful seasons. Like, that going back to, like, the earliest seasons, there were seasons where just nobody off of that show ever became anything next or near a hallmark talent for the division or for the UFC. But we're still, like, TJ Dillashaw won a title not that long ago, and we are still getting elite, great athletes coming through there. It's just that now they take so long to become
that you forget that they're tough guys in the first place.
Yeah.
Tony Ferguson is a tough fighter, and no one thinks of that anymore. When you look at him, he's just another elite lightweight.
Exactly. Tony Ferguson is coming off one of many seasons where people were just like, what are they really getting out of this show?
That was one of the seasons. I remember people were like, there's no one on this show. Like, no one on this show is going to turn into anything. And then the final was Ramsey Nedjam and Tony Ferguson. And both turned into, like, fairly solid fighters. And Ferguson, like, went, like, and has become an elite fighter.
Yeah, I mean, Ferguson's now a legit title contender, and it just takes so long that people don't recognize it anymore. So that's kind of why we're here, is because you have to remind people every step of the way. It's like, no, this guy's really pretty good, and he will probably be very good in the future. Maybe not certainly. You can never tell who's just going to flame out horribly, but he's certainly got the athletic tools and the training and is building a resume with wins, the Joe Ban one aside, but beating Nordine Taleb and Colby Covington in his last 2 fights are both pretty
the Covington fight's big. Like, that's a big feather in the cap for a young fighter coming up to, like, ace another young prospect like that.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to see this Warlley Alves Brian Barberena fight. Barberena especially because he's tough and scrappy, so I'm really hoping that he can make Alves work a little.
Mm-hmm.
Something like a really fun kind of highlight performance for Alves, but it should be a great performance. It should be a great way to open the pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Otherwise, let's see. We've got Rob Font in this fight with John Lineker, and weirdly, because John Lineker is only 26, and Rob Font is 28, but for our purposes, Rob Font is really the guy we want to talk about.
Yeah, he won the prospect matchup against Joey Gomez earlier this year, and now he's getting a veteran who kind of fits into, like, Rob Font is a fairly technical striker. He managed to thoroughly outbox Joey Gomez, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yeah, he looked great in that fight.
So now they're giving him another step up of, like, can you thoroughly outwork John Lineker, who not the most technical striker on the feet, but holy crap, does he throw bricks?
Yeah, you can't really. Unfortunately, you can't really outwork John Lineker. Like, that's kind of a problem. And it's a weird fight to me because it seems like, like with John Dodson getting a fight against Manny Gambarian, it's like for some reason when these bantamweight or these flyweights are moving up to bantamweight, the UFC is kind of like, yeah, let's see what you top 3, top 5 like bantamweight or flyweight can prove against a guy in the division. It's like John Lineker is probably going to murder Rob Font here. What does that really prove? John Lineker is very obviously a top-level bantamweight in the division. I mean, it just, I don't know why they've got him kind of kicking around in the middle. I think Rob Font's a great fighter. Like I say, I thought he put on a fantastic performance. He looked like a more nuanced kickboxer with a lot more variation in his game last time out. But
well, there is. I mean, I don't know the reach stats on these fighters, but the height difference is about like half foot. So Font, Font has some advantages in this that he could, if he's skillful enough with them, could turn into. I mean, like he's going to have to stay on his bike. He's going to have to stay on the outside, and then he's going to have to not get hit.
Yeah, the thing for me, though, is just like Ian McCall, who is a legitimately very good fighter, as much as he may sometimes get inside his own head, was pretty thoroughly just beat up by John Lineker not that long ago.
Yep.
And
it could be, I don't disagree that this could end up being like a one-sided drubbing. Because Lineker's run off some good wins. He's a really good fighter.
You kind of have to be an ultra-controlling wrestler to beat him, or, pull a Louis Gaudinot and just kind of whip a submission out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But, yeah, otherwise, Rob Font's really just going to probably want to go out and try and out-kickbox John Lineker, and
good luck with that.
Yeah, that seems like a bad plan. It's too bad for Rob Font too, because like I say, he's a young fighter on the rise. He's developing nicely since coming to the UFC. Well, he's only had 2 fights to come to the UFC, but he beat George Roop, he beat Joey Gomez, started his career back late 2011, early 2012. His only loss is to Des Green, who's a really pretty decent fighter, all told. And it's just, I don't know. This is going to be a very, very tough matchup for Rob Font, so I feel a little bad for him.
Speaking of tough matchups and one-sided drubbings, what about Corey Anderson, Shogun?
I don't know about. See, this is the thing. This is a well-matched fight.
Is it though?
Yes. Because Shogun is very, very obviously a better fighter technically than Corey Anderson, right?
I mean, if we just had them compare martial arts knowledge, then yes.
Like, just as a skilled striker and as a grappler, all these things, it's just Shogun's better. He's got faster hands, he's quicker on the trigger, but Corey Anderson is probably going to beat him just because Shogun can't take a punch anymore.
I think there's also a high probability that Corey Anderson spends a significant amount of time on top of Shogun, who grinding them down.
This is very likely too. I mean, let me put it this way. I'm glad to see it feels a little bit rare to me that the UFC actually actively uses a classic headlining talent for them to build up a new young fighter that people don't give a shit about.
Well, at this point, that's what Shogun's either here for classic rematches or building young fighters, because they used him against OSP and got OSP out there, and then they put him with Little Nog and did the rematch of the Pride fight, and now they're putting him back in there. He won, so now he's in there to give another light heavyweight prospect a little bit of shine. Because
I think the only thing that puts me in any kind of like, the only reason I think I'm actively reasonably comfortable with this is that Anderson is not a very good finisher at all.
Anderson's not going to, this is, of all the fights with like aging Brazilian stars on this card, this is not the one where I'm worried that like the aging Brazilian is going to be taken out on a stretcher.
Yeah. Anderson is a good physical, grinding fighter who pushes a great pace. He's got a nice takedown game. He can even strike reasonably all right. But as we saw in the Tom Lawler fight, Lawler was able to blast him early and hurt him, but Anderson was just able to tough it out and grind him to win. And so that at least, that's partially why I think it's a good fight, is just because assuming Shogun is more technical and hits harder, then Anderson is going to give him more opportunities than practically any other matchup would right now.
Yeah, I think there's going to be, I don't see anything in Shogun's wrestling that Anderson's going to have to respect to a degree. And then the ground, oh God, I happily got broken of the myth of Shogun's ground game, but I was on that train for way too long. His ground game is at one point. Well, I was gonna say about 10 years ago, he was an acceptably slick ground fighter for the state of MMA then, but the game evolved and he didn't, and he has stayed static as a ground grappler, and now he's just kind of like a standard like athletic black belt in MMA when pretty much everyone at a high level is a standard athletic black belt in terms of
it's worth noting that Chael Sonnen choked him out, and Chael Sonnen, while a great wrestler, has never, his knowledge of the ground game has always been touch and go.
There's gaps, we'll put it that way.
Yeah, there's gaps. Basically, the only people that Chael Sonnen in his career has submitted are somebody named Tim McKenzie, Brian Stan, Shogun Hua, and somebody named Greg Kernett. Oh, and a forearm choke in 2002 of Scott Shipman.
Oh, the dreaded forearm choke.
So Brian Stan, Shogun Hua are the only modern submissions on Chael Sonnen's record.
Yeah.
And Brian Stan himself was not a world-class grappler when it came to that part of the sport.
No. I mean, it did show that Sonnen can get some work done if he passes your guard. It just, his guard passing isn't good. There's no other way to say it.
Yeah, this Corey Anderson fight, I like this fight. Like, I actually actively like this fight because it's nice. It feels rare to me to see the UFC really give a young fighter who is maybe not, ready, who's not ready for it on a name value scale in any way, shape, or form, a chance to get a big win over a guy who is almost only name value at this point.
Yeah, no, and I think that sums up Shogun perfectly. And I think this fight either is going to be sad in the way that like an aging legend getting beat up can only be, or there's a really high potential it's just going to be a dreadful fight. And then there's like the 1% chance that Hua lands like an amazing punch and knocks Corey Anderson out, and the place goes absolutely fucking nuts because they're fighting in Curitiba, which would be incredible. Like that's just the fan in me wants that to happen because it would be such an incredible moment. It would be Big Nog knocking out Shab in Rio, that sort of thing. I don't think it's going to happen though.
I mean, I'm just, fortunately for the UFC, they were smart enough to put Chris Cyborg versus Leslie Smith right after it so that the fans will absolutely get their hometown violence quotient going.
Oh, my God, that's going to be – because, I mean, Leslie Smith can take an ass kicking. Yeah. Like, she is really tough.
So –
and they put her in there to die.
She wanted the fight. I mean, she asked for it,
Yeah. So
she asked for it, and I think it was her way to negotiate a new contract with the UFC. Which to me, I mean, if you're gonna fight and you're gonna have to take ass kickings in your career, that's a smart way to go.
Get paid for it, yeah.
Yep. I'll get on this pay-per-view and take an ass kicking in front of a shit ton of people for more money. But that also. Down at the bottom of the card, we want to talk, since we're talking light heavyweights in prospect versus old dudes who should probably be retired matchups. We have Patrick Cummins versus Antonio Rogerio Nogueira. And this is a fight where I am really very certain that Cummins is just going to do work on Nogueira.
Probably. My general reaction to this fight is just
Yeah.
I just eh.
Cummins and Corey Anderson are both suffering severely from a case of, especially, and this seems to be way more true at light heavyweight than any other division, maybe at middleweight too, but of the idea of getting to the UFC really early and then having everybody watch you fail over and over again. And so they just get generally less and less enthused about you as you go forward.
Yeah. At least Corey Anderson, for the most part, has failed successfully and has won his fights, even when he hasn't been like phenomenal. But
yeah, he did get knocked out by John Vellante.
He did. That's the one. But like Patrick Cummins has he's gotten like step forward fights on several occasions. I mean, obviously the Daniel Cormier fight when he stepped up his weight, took it on short notice, and then the Ovince Prue fight, was not good for him at all. And then they gave him Rafael Cavalcante, which is like a nice little step back fight. And then they threw him in with Glover Teixeira to get murdered.
Yeah, the weird thing is they keep giving him either a borderline top 15 fighter, somebody that like is barely relevant in the division, and then a top 5 guy.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you beat Antonio Carlos Jr., fight OSP. And like
OSP Cavalcante, have one of the top 5 guys in the division.
Yep. So he's gonna fight Little Nog here, and then he'll probably fight Alexander Gustafsson.
Yeah, Patrick Cummins, just like in terms of skill progression, in terms of age, like I just have a hard time getting excited about him. Like I can get excited about Corey Anderson because I can see where that's going. I don't really see Patrick Cummins becoming much more than he already is. I mean, like he'll add skills, and it's light heavyweight, so like in 5 years he'll still be around and still probably be fighting. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure he'll. But at current, I'm just like I'll watch the fight, but it's not one that I have like circled that I'm like, ooh, this one.
Yeah, he has, unfortunately, that there's that potential that he may age out of the sport before he finishes developing.
Mm-hmm.
Like he just, he may end up with too many injuries or just with getting too slow or something like that before his skill game is finished solidifying. But yeah, he definitely has that weird thing of being almost entirely a control-based wrestler, or actually really almost entirely a takedown artist. Like that's kind of the weird problem for him is that he's not a great top control player, which was kind of the big reason I didn't pick him to beat OSP is because he doesn't keep people down when he gets them down, and he's a rinse and
repeater, yeah.
And then he's not a submission threat, and he's not a consistent enough boxer to be a reasonable knockout threat. He doesn't have the defense to stand in front of you and just trade.
Yeah.
So with guys who he can't physically just run out of the building like Teixeira, like OSP, then he'll take him down with huge takedowns. They'll pop right back up from under him, and then they'll start punching him really, really hard. Fortunately for him, with Little Nog, he doesn't have that problem.
No.
Yeah, that should be a matchup that he can run out of the building because, Little Nog is somebody that lost a 3-round battle with Shogun in like 2015 and lost it mostly because despite hurting Shogun badly enough to finish the fight, couldn't pull the trigger hard enough or often enough to actually make the finish happen.
Yeah. So you want to step outside the UFC, talk some BAMMA?
Yeah, there's not a lot of interest for me in Luan Chagas. He's young and he's tough, and he's aggressive, so he's got the potential to develop, but his game's going to need a lot of development to have me really interested in talking about him.
Cosign.
Yeah. Otherwise, I think it's time to jump to BAMMA. There's, a decent fight in Bellator we could talk about, Adam Piccolotii versus Ray Wood, but frankly, BAMMA is where, like, the other cache of really high-end prospects are.
Yeah, and obviously Tom Duquesnoy fighting for the bantamweight title. And And pretty much at this point, every Tom Duquesnoy fight in BAMMA could potentially be his last fight.
Yeah, I don't remember how long the new contract he signed was, so that may be we may have because like after his last fight, or maybe it was 2 fights ago now, he signed a new contract and re-upped. So it could be 3 fights or something like that. I don't know, but
yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised if he is looking. I mean, this is a guy that we have both heard that he is actively looking to that. He is thinking about that move to the UFC. He turned down an offer. He wants to be ready. He dropped a weight class since turning down the offer. This guy is building towards his UFC career. We've talked about him a bunch on the show. He's a fantastic fighter. Going to be interested to see how he does against Jay Walsh. His bantamweight debut was a murder-death kill. So I'm just looking forward to seeing him fight again, continue to watch him develop.
Yeah, he's got all the tools. I'm really glad he dropped a weight class. It'll be nice to see how he can do, because he was starting to hit a power differential the more he hung out on the regional scene, starting to find, when they keep matching you up with the toughest guys they can find on that circuit, he started to find a lack of ability. When he couldn't finish people on the feet easily, then he got himself into some really tough fights.
Yeah.
But he's definitely, he's such an aggressive, well-built MMA striker and wrestler and grappler that it's going to be really fun to see where he takes that. Also, the guy I'm really excited for too on that card of several is Marc Diakiese. He, this is somebody that just recently came to mind for me, and Jesus. And he really has a fun, funky sort of, kind of high octane game to him, where it looks like he's kind of building it backwards almost, where he's got all these big flashy pieces to his game, and now he's building in all the things that will make that a functional long-term style. Like you see more wrestling and grappling and things like that. So I'm really looking forward to his fight.
Yeah. Yep. I'm excited. Walter Gahadza is also fighting on this card, who is a really premier athlete, raw skills, and is just a first-class can crusher. Just fights total trash opposition. But he's fighting Colin Fletcher, a UFC veteran, and Gahadza is a guy who has been looking for that UFC contract by all accounts. And so fighting a UFC veteran is one of the ways you get noticed. And this is easily the toughest fight he's ever fought. So I'm really interested to see how he does in this case.
Yeah, I have a feeling this could be just the fight where, and we've seen this for a few fighters, especially you see it in the U.S. for fighters, where they will crush cans for a really long time, and then they'll take that one fight against a UFC vet, or they'll capture a regional title in one fight in a legit organization, and that'll be their ticket to the UFC. So I could see this being the fight that gets, that maybe that Joe Silva or Sean Shelby have been watching and waiting for from Walter Gahadza to prove that he can hang. And if he wins this, he might be on his way out to bigger things, because he is a top athlete. He is powerful. He's building a functional, just sort of power striking, power takedowns, power ground and pound from the top highlight game. But yeah, he's just not doing it against very good competition, and a win over Colin Fletcher would be pretty big.
Yep. And then also on this card, Ed Arthur, who just recently challenged the bantamweight title, and is a really solid, good grappler, a little bit of a rigid striker, but good wrestling, very aggressive submission work. And then Mike Grundy, who was a scouting report top 10 featherweight, really powerful wrestling, really good front headlock game, good athlete, just really all-around interesting fighter to watch. Glad to see him getting back in there. He was, last time we saw him fight was about a year ago. He arm triangle choked, a guy in BAMMA 21. Damian Frankovic. And he dropped his first fight in March of last year to a triangle choke. But other than that, he is just front headlocking, head and arm choking fools right and left. and I kind of
Yeah,
expect.
well, that was to Damian Stasiak, who has, even since then, with a very quick submission win over Philip Page, proved that he can be a difficult submission artist to tangle with. And it's that classic kind of wrestler thing where you get on top of a dangerous grappler and they lock you up in a triangle because you just keep throwing yourself into their guard.
Yeah, and then let's see, over in Australia, Michael Tobin's getting back in the cage this weekend. He just fought in April, and he's getting back in there. And really excellent athlete. Really looks like he could turn into something like a solid fighter. He's still developing, but he's got like a really flowy grappling game. And I think he's just got that toughness and aggressiveness that kind of marks him as like guy to watch down the road. So he's I forget which promotion he's fighting. It's actually going to be on Fight Pass if I recall correctly.
Oh, is it Victory or something?
Let me check. I believe his card is going to be on Fight Pass. Let me open up Fight Pass and see what they're advertising on here. Not Coery. Brace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So he's fighting.
Yeah, because he's got that Muay Thai background, and he tends to but mostly in MMA, he's a grappler, right?
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
And then what's some other interesting stuff? Legacy has a card, and they got a heavyweight that's kind of worth checking out. There's Justin Ledet, who started fighting MMA in 2010, but took about 2 years, or took like 4 years off to pursue a professional boxing career briefly.
Went undefeated as a boxer.
Undefeated as a boxer, didn't fight any amazing competition, but still, ran off 5 wins at heavyweight boxing, came back to MMA. I haven't been able to find any tape on his most recent fight, which was in Rage in the Cage, but he's fighting on Legacy, so definitely a guy worth checking out, because anytime you got a halfway athletic heavyweight, you got to pay attention. In Finland, Cage 35 is going down with a couple really interesting prospects. Did you get a chance to look at Felipe Silva?
I did. I'm interested to see what he's not very young, even though his MMA career is pretty early and it's pretty early goings, but he definitely looks powerful. Like, I don't know, it's kind of a weird fighter. Like a lot of Brazilian fighters, he's both very powerful and yet just kind of a mess, Yeah. It's like he's really aggressive and going after people, does well in the clinch, does well to like throw people to the ground and ground and pound them and stuff like that, but just kind of all over the place, slips and falls a lot when throwing kicks or stuff like that. Just really seems to like throw his whole body into everything.
Mm-hmm. So I'd agree. It's one of those like weird matchups. He's clearly a good athlete, and you hope as he figures the game out that starts coming together.
Yeah, I'm more interested in Mika Hamalainen actually.
Yeah, Mika Hamalainen. He's an interesting grappler type. Really kind of well-rounded submission game. Little like muscly fire plug sort of body type.
Yeah, I could easily see him going down to flyweight, and just with his power and his like aggressive speed grappling, it seems like he might do real well there.
Yeah, and speaking of speed grappling, also on here, a featherweight extra feature in the Bloody Elbow Sky Revert. Rafael Domingos, who's a Damian Maia black belt and just causes chaos on the ground.
Yeah.
Likes just initiating scrambles and catching positions and submissions. Really fun fighter to watch. So that card in Finland, pretty darn stacked up with prospects as well. And then there was somebody else fighting.
Let's jump back and talk quickly about Fight Night.
Sorry, real quick, I found him. Oh God, how do you say his name? Askerov. Yeah.
Dzhabar Askerov.
Yeah, who is a fairly high level Muay Thai fighter, to my understanding. Yeah. He went to a decision with who's the Muay Thai fighter right now?
I don't know. Now
Bakwa?
Buakaw?
He went to a decision with Buakaw. Fought a not like a competitive decision, but fought a decent fight against him, and he has basically no wrestling or grappling, but he's been making it work in the clinch and at range.
Oh, well, and I think his upcoming fight is a kickboxing bout. But it's on a mixed card.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's on
Yeah,
a
he's been
mixed
doing a lot of
MMA.
those. He'll take some MMA fights and then some kickboxing fights in Russian promotions. Yeah.
But yeah, he's one of those fighters in Russia now that's starting to do more of the like combination MMA and kickboxing career, which is starting to become a little more of a thing right now in Russia, and is kind of exciting because we're starting to see more crossover of like high level kickboxers taking some fun MMA fights on the Russian circuit, or MMA fighters turning over to kickboxing out of there as well. So I don't know, fun crossover. Hopefully we see him take some more MMA fights soon.
Yep.
But I want to talk about very quickly last week. Really the shining star of last week's show, or of last week's UFC show in Rotterdam, was totally unexpected to me. It wasn't Albert Tumanov, which is who we expected it to be.
Yep.
I mean, we already knew that Nikita Krylov was going to do all of the beautiful things Nikita Krylov does, so that wasn't a surprise.
He's never going to lose again, obviously.
Never going to lose again. It wasn't Chris Wade, who, as we assumed, did not have the power to get by Rustam Khabilov, but it was Josh Emmett, and I was totally shocked by that. I would not have picked him to. Not only did he beat John Tuck, but for 2 rounds until he ripped his finger in half, he looked absolutely phenomenal. Like I was watching that fight thinking, does this guy really train at Team Alpha Male? Because he does not strike like he trains at Team Alpha Male.
He looked more like he got into a big cage for the first time, and he looked like a Ludwig striker suddenly. Like he was out there, the way he was moving, the way he was setting up angles, he looked like he had spent a significant amount of time with Ludwig, or maybe, working with TJ. But yeah, like totally a huge jump in his striking game. And I don't know if that's because the cage provided him more space to work, or what was it, but he looked really good, and God, that finger.
But I was just really, really pleasantly surprised, because I kind of pegged him as somebody who maybe, if he did a lot of work to round out his striking, could be a fun action fighter in the UFC, kick around on the lower end of some cards. But honestly, with the kind of movement and combination body head punching he showed, and just consistent in and out, good output, high work rate stuff that he did, he could become an upper division action fighter. Like, I still don't know that I'm like, oh, obviously he's on a run for title contention, especially not as a 31-year-old who started his MMA career late. But just, he could move up into that kind of Joe Lozani, Dan Miller kind of territory, where you're kind of, not Dan, is it Dan Miller? Jim Miller. There we go. The other Miller. Jim Miller territory, where he's just in a bunch of good, high-level, top 30 to 20 action fights.
Yeah, I think the other guy that really stood out for me was Magnus Sedenblad, who just came out and like clearly had spent a lot of time on his striking. Just came out and looked like a totally different striker. Used his range really well. Had some really nice straight punches, and used that straight punching to help set up his favorite part of his striking game, the kicks. And he just put it on Gareth McLean.
Yeah, Sedenblad, unfortunately, not really a prospect, but a great, it's rare and nice to see a guy really far along in his career make those kind of adjustments. He's in his mid-30s. He's been fighting since 2007. He gets a long injury layoff, comes back, and just looks like he's tuned up every part of his game.
Yeah, and I think on the disappointing end, obviously, Albert Tumanov, who I feel like he has a good first and second layer takedown defense. Like, he's really good at using range and footwork and stuff to stop takedowns, but he couldn't figure out Gunnar Nelson's timing on his shots. And Gunnar was getting to that third layer where you actually have to be able to wrestle to stop a takedown, and Albert Tumanov can't wrestle.
Yeah, I think it may also just be a problem of him not willing to be light enough on his feet, or maybe not able to be light enough on his feet to constantly create the space where he can easily avoid a quick, powerful shot.
Yeah.
He's just, he wants to He very much wants to be a box first fighter. And so he tends to, because he wants to land with power, he tends to want to be a bit flat footed in that and really sit down on his punches in front of people. And then it just isn't quite showing the foot speeds for when a fighter like Gunnar Nelson changes speeds changes rhythm or speed moving in and out.
Which for Nelson is a new thing. Like changing rhythm is a new thing. Like he made some improvements in this.
Oh yeah, absolute improvements from Nelson. But it's interesting to me because Tumanov's obviously, he's only 24. He's still early in his career, still developing. And this feels, this could be his first run up against the top end of the division, where he'll now go back, do a little rebuilding, and make another run as a much improved fighter. Or it could be the representation of a long-term problem where at the upper end against top-level wrestlers, he's just not quite active enough to be a constant threat.
Yeah. And then I think the other disappointing one is, I don't know, Anna Elmos, who, I seem to remember saying that she had nothing for Germaine de Randamie.
If you said that, you may have. My feeling, it was not so much that, I bet Anna Elmos is going to really be an awesomely tough fight for Germaine de Randamie. It's just that I've never been impressed by Germaine de Randamie, and I had no faith in her actually putting together a great fight against anyone.
Yeah, well, my liver still hurts after watching that one.
Yeah, that was heavy work. Obviously early on the card, Kyoji Horiguchi and Leon Edwards both showed up and put together his Horiguchi more so against a very, very game Neil Seary. Just Horiguchi did great work, dropped Seary several times, easily outworked him for 15 minutes. And Edwards is definitely a fighter I'm having some concerns about, as in that same sort of Albert Tumanov way, but at a much earlier stage.
Yeah.
Where, like, even in this Dominic Waters fight, where he had an opponent that was pretty much his physical equal, was not more technical or more talented than him anywhere, there was just a few moments where Edwards just looked like he just got run over on takedowns or offensively by Waters, and he was able to scramble back and work a very good game and do the things he needed to do to win the fight. But it's just these kind of things where, like, if Dominic Waters is just running in and pushing you over on a takedown defense, or when you're trying to sprawl out on a takedown, then maybe you're going to have some major physical problems when you go up against the better and bigger and grindier athletes. Like, part of me is like, it'd be really fun to see Leon Edwards fight Zach Cummins, and the rest of me is like, Zach Cummins would probably just maul him.
Yeah. Well,
so
I think that's everything.
I think that covers us pretty much for this show.
All right.
Anyway, thank you for joining all of us, or thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Tom, for joining me. You can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find both of us at Bloody Elbow in our various capacities. Give this video a like. That's the thumbs up. Subscribe to MMANation.com as DOTCOM over on YouTube. That's great for us. That way you get all the latest Bloody Elbow videos, interviews, analysis, shows, whatever else we're doing. We'll be coming at you with a vivisection for Overeem Arlovsky. We've already done If I Did It, and not Overeem Arlovsky, vivisection for UFC 198. We've already had If I Did It, Care Don't Care. We'll be having a 6th round. We'll be doing a vivisection for this upcoming Bellator card too. All sorts of stuff like that.
And I got a prospect list coming out next week with Flow Combat.
Yeah, Tom's over writing for Flow Combat too, so you can check him out there. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time.